Hi, this is Andrew Reversa with Impact Soundworks, and today I'm going to be showcasing Volume 1 of Ventus Ethnic Winds, the Shakuhachi. The goal of Ventus is to take you on a journey all over the world and explore solo woodwinds that are not part of the Western repertoire. For example, the Shakuhachi, but we're also going to be recording instruments from other continents, Europe, Africa, South America, and I'm excited to announce more. With all the instruments in this series, there's a common user interface, meaning you don't have to learn something new every time. There's also a common set of features to help you achieve realistic and authentic performances in a very easy way, even if you don't intimately know each one of these instruments. So let's listen to the Shakuhachi just playing some basic sustains and legato with the default patch. No edits made. The dynamics can be smoothly controlled with the dynamics slider here, which right now I have MIDI learned to the mod wheel CC1. You can also introduce vibrato with the vibrato slider. Now switching to smooth mode, which is generated by Kontakt. The advantage of the smooth mode is that you can change the depth and the frequency of vibrato. We'll get to that a little bit later. There's also the flutter articulation, which can be smoothly crossfaded as well. Since these are very important to any performance, we have these front and center, and again, all of these can be easily MIDI learned or automated in your host. Another feature that's common to all of the Ventus series is the ornaments playback system. With this, you can add both attack and release ornaments without any manual sequencing. They're all played at random. The more you turn up the knob, the more ornaments you'll get as you play. For example, I'll turn this up to about halfway and just play some simple sustains. So with no key switching or CC changes, we have a performance with all this life breathed into it through these three articulations here. You can change the percentage chance that any of these articulations will play just by dragging, or you can type it in. And then changing this knob will reduce or increase the chance that any ornament will trigger. So if it's all the way down, none of these will trigger, of course. And if it's all the way up, then when you play sustains, you'll always get one of these three, and the chance that you get any particular one is determined by these numbers. The same applies to release ornaments too. We have 5 different types, so let's enable 4 of them, and we'll do a 25% even split. I'll disable the attack ornaments for now, just so you can focus on the releases. So there we heard a variety of different release ornaments that were all, again, triggered at random through the ornament system. Now you can trigger all of those articulations manually using the Articulations tab here, but this is an easy way to get an authentic performance very quickly without having to do any special sequencing. So for now, let me turn this down. We'll take a quick look at the entire articulation list. The articulation system here uses our brand new TACT, which is Total Articulation Control Technology, and I've covered that already in a separate video. So I won't go into any more depth about the features here, but I will play each of these articulations so you can hear what they sound like. Once again, here's the normal sustain with legato enabled. Then we have sustain bend up. With this articulation, playing low velocity will trigger a slower bend, and higher velocities will trigger faster ones. Then we have the sustain Grace 2 and Grace 3 ornaments, which you heard already, but here's what they sound like in isolation. You'll notice that the exact grace notes played vary a little bit depending on which note I play, and that's because the shakuhachi is a pentatonic instrument, this particular one being pentatonic on the D scale. The intermediate notes are played using a sort of a half-holding technique, which means that when you do grace notes, it's a little bit trickier to get the same pitches as on the pentatonic notes. If you want to just use those main pitches, we actually have a separate pentatonic patch, which will only enable the notes that are easily playable by the shakuhachi. Getting back to articulations, we have the emotive sustain, which is very breathy. Then there are actually 12 types of trills that we've recorded for this instrument, and these are grouped into 3 separate articulations. Playing low or high velocity will trigger slow or fast trills. Now when I press the trill key switch, another set of notes appears above the normal playing range, and this is because we have 2 separate groups of performances for each trill as well, in addition to the slow and fast. These down here are generally minor, and up in the upper octaves we have major intervals, again, generally speaking. So here's A in the lower octaves, and then the upper. And if we switch to the third interval, and finally, effects trills, which are more like fourths, fifths, and augmented intervals. Lastly, for the normal articulations, we have repeated, which is a sort of a sustain with grace notes added in every so often. There's legato, which you've been hearing all along. And then we have 5 different types of release noises. I'll go through them one by one. The stopped release noise is very fast and subtle, and it's basically when the airstream is simply stopped. If I adjust the volume, you can hear it more clearly, although you wouldn't necessarily want to do this in a mix. We then have bend down, which is a simple downwards bend in pitch. Followed by bend up. There's the long and breathy emotive release, which stays on the same pitch but adds some extra air. And finally, honk, which is a sort of a pinched squeak at the end of the note. Going back to the main tab, down here we have some basic instrument editing controls. We have 2 mic positions, which can be enabled and disabled pretty easily, and then volume levels for each one. Now at the moment in our effects rack, which you've probably seen before, I have reverb enabled because the instrument really does sound nice with reverb on it. But just for the purposes of demonstrating the mics, I'll turn it off, and we'll check out the close mic first. Now here's the room mic. Now, having heard all of the articulations and both mic positions, By now you'll hear that the shakuhachi is a very, very breathy instrument, and the amount of breath can vary based on what note you play. So this is definitely something where you'll want to control the dynamics carefully as you play a melody. Some notes you might want more emphasized than others. But another feature that we have is a gentle filter that can take out some of the breathiness, and that's assigned to MIDI CC 3 by default. It's a subtle effect, but very handy. Moving on, we have a simple ADSR envelope, as well as MIDI transposition and fine-tuning. Plus micro-tuning. The way this works is by applying a pitch offset to each note in a scale, and you can set the bass note of the scale here. So for example, if I set it to E, and then I do an offset like this, you can hear that it affects the first 6 notes in this case, then not the next ones, and once I get back up to E, it loops back to the first bar in the table. So if you want to do an authentic scale or any sort of special tuning, this is where to do it. Moving to the Advanced tab, we have some very useful features here related to the ornament system. One of the first questions that we were asked by beta testers when we introduced the ornament system was, how do I record those random ornaments in case I want to play them back for a render, or if I want to edit them later? You can do that by pressing the record button. So I'm going to play 5 notes just very separated so you can hear them. So let's say that you really like those particular 5 ornaments as they were played. So now you just switch back to playback mode. The ornaments that play are exactly the same, both for attacks and releases. You can then clear out the sequence if you like. You can double-click the play button to return the sequence to the beginning point, which is what you would want to do before a render. You can save the file and then load it later. And you can even save it into a human-readable format. By holding Shift and clicking Save, I'll call this My Sequence, you can then load this in any text editor and see which ornaments played on which notes. So here we go. We can see that on D3 we had a sustained grace 3 with an emotive release, and so on and so forth. And this can record, I think we had it set to over 5,000 ornaments in sequence, so you definitely won't run out of space anytime soon. The legato parameters can also be adjusted, and you can drastically change how the transitions sound. If I reduce the pre-transition time and increase the length, we can make the transitions more emphasized and much slower. Pre-transition basically plays back earlier in the transition sample, so you hear that change in pitch a little bit later on. Now if we turn this up and then turn the length down, we get a much snappier legato transition. The exact settings that will work for you depends on the kind of music that you're writing, but the nice thing is that all of these can be MIDI learned as well. Now going back to that smooth vibrato feature I mentioned, you can change the depth and frequency right here. There's a little bit of randomness that's added by default, but this just sets the sort of the baseline for the depth and the frequency. These controls here are explained a little bit more in the manual, but basically mono fade time controls what happens to notes, how fast they're faded out if legato is not enabled. Since this isn't a polyphonic instrument, there can only be one note at one time. The extra dynamic filter will remove more breathiness at lower dynamic values. So if I turn this off and then I sweep from low to high, we have a pretty consistent amount of breath, but some people really like it to not be as breathy at the lower dynamic values, so we put this feature in. Release trigger samples can be turned on and off here, and this is nice if you have a sort of a complex release sample mapping and you just want to turn it off for a second because you want to hear the ornament releases, or if you just don't want them at all. You can also set microphones to purge when they're off, which will save memory, or if you want to audition different mic positions quickly, you might want to turn this feature off instead. Lastly, the pitch wheel can be set to normal bend mode, which sounds about how you would expect. Or you could set it to release mode, which will play a release sample in the direction that you move the pitch wheel. That covers the main Shakuhachi patch, but we also have a phrases patch. We recorded over 600 separate phrases in all sorts of different styles. You can see them grouped here. And these are a great way to sort of jumpstart your inspiration or just to pepper in your track for extra color. So I'm just going to play a few of these now so you can get a sense of what they sound like. You can switch groups either by clicking or by using a key switch. In the waveform display here, we have sample start and end points, which are saved for each phrase. So let's say you don't want any of this stuff, you can set that to here. Or if you only want the first part of the sample, you could do something like this. Now for the sound designers among you, let's check out arpeggios. We can set this to reverse, which has a very interesting effect. And now if we go to shorts and turn bounce on, this is just sort of a fun feature. It's certainly not authentic, but it's pretty cool, so we put it in. Now if you look at the patch name, you'll see that this is the Time Machine Pro version, which gives you speed control over the phrases. The reason this isn't the only phrases patch is because Time Machine Pro can be a little CPU intensive on some systems. So you can load the other patch, which will remove the speed control, and use it that way. We also have all of the phrases included as WAV files, so you can drag and drop them in your DAW. So that covers Ventus Ethnic Winds Shakuhachi. The nice thing about this video is that it's going to be applicable to all of the subsequent Ventus volumes as well. Even though we'll be doing different instruments, all of these features like the ornament system, the phrases, sample playback, the articulation system, all of that is going to be common to all of the entries into this series. The Shakuhachi is available now for the list price of $99, but if you're on our mailing list, you should already have a coupon in your inbox to save some money off the list price. Also, everybody that purchases the Shakuhachi will get a rebate that can be used not only for future Ventus series entries, but also any instrument in our store. We hope that these instruments will inspire you, that you'll enjoy using them, and that you'll transport your music to a faraway land. This has been Andrew Aversa. Thanks for watching.